tied funding. And you can get the grants you can actually obtain through various means. Private grants, so they're through private philanthropic bodies. They're more aimed at not-for-profit organisations, corporate grants and government grants as well. How do you find out about grants? So for organisations that are for-profit or organisations that are not-for-profit, it's pretty much the same process in terms of applying and looking for funding. The best bet to look at is your local newspaper. So have a look regionally what's available in your local area. There might be council grants, there might be private organisations wanting to provide support. You've got the website search, and we generally have a look at just Googling grants and putting up the region where we are to see if there's anything available in your area. Google searches as well. So that's going into Google search, and you set up a program whereby you can actually have tag words so that every time something is released into the media, through that tag word, it sends you an email so that you know if there's something about grants and in your local area, or something about swimming, education, aquatics, anything at all like that. Have a look at those that are relevant to your organisation, and they'll send you an email every time something comes in the media about that, which is a really good way of not missing particular opportunities. Social media, make sure your organisation is on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. That's a great way of being able to be notified about particular grants. If there's funding bodies that you're already aware of, go into the Facebook page and like them, because when they launch a particular funding program, they will put that out on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Obviously, you've got your local research in your local area. And then there's a couple of really good research sites as well that you can use. There's Grants Guru, Grants Hub, Philanthropy Australia, and also signing up to some government subscriptions. So in the chat column there, they'll send through the links for those particular sites. And they're good just to go in and have a look at and see what's actually relevant to you. You can target your specific searches as well, depending on the type of program that you might be looking to commence as well. Signing up to government subscriptions. Now, whenever the government releases a new funding program, whether that's through local council, your state government or the federal government, they will, generally speaking, put out a media release. But you don't want to just be relying on media releases. So any government departments that are relevant to providing funding for your particular area, and with swim schools and aquatics, you do cross over a number of different areas. So you're obviously looking at sport and rec, you're looking at health, you're looking at education. So just make sure that you're signed up to those particular government websites. And then when they are sending out a media release, the media release will pop straight into your inbox. And that's a great way of making sure that you don't miss out on any of these funding opportunities. So if you've kind of got, 3 or 4 of those bullet points covered in terms of your research, you're pretty much guaranteed to get just about everything. Grant administration. So obviously the work that we do here at Surf Life Saving and Life Saving Victoria, a lot of that has to do with the clubs. And one of the most common areas that we have in terms of not being ready to apply for a particular grant is not having all your basic documents ready to go. And there's this last minute scramble to obtain all the eligibility documents that you're required to actually lodge a grant. Some of those could be your incorporation certificate or your constitutional documents, whatever it is, whatever that document is that makes you an organisation, making sure that you have that readily available in e-form, your latest set of financial accounts, if you do an annual report, and your public liability insurance. Having those documents stored in a central location just makes it so much easier when you're applying for grants, because you're not scrambling around looking for everything or having to get in contact with somebody else, the accountant, to try and find those documents. The other important part is making sure the government registers are up to date. Now, this is relevant to not-for-profits or corporates as well. So the ABR is the Australian Business Register. That's where your organisational details are recorded and registered. So your ABN will be there, the type of organisation that you are will be there. Now, generally speaking, these are up to date, but we have come across a number of organisations where they are listed as an incorporated association and they're not, or they're listed as an Australian public company and they're not. So the registration's actually just been marked incorrect. So always have a look at that first to make sure all your registration details are up to date. And then you've got ASIC, which is the Australian Securities Investment Commission. Okay, so if you're an incorporated association, your registration will be held there, and it's always a good idea just to go in there and have a look. If you happen to be a not-for-profit, the other site to make sure you're up to date with is the Australian Charities Non-Profit Commission. Now that link's not going to appear in the chat today, but we can make that available afterwards. I've predominantly made this presentation though more towards swim schools and for-profit entities. The other thing you need to look at as well is making sure you're recording all of your activities. So anything that you're doing from an education perspective or a program perspective, have all of that ready. Get all your templates. If you write a grant before, keep it in a central location so you can reuse a lot of that information so that when you write another grant, you're not having to constantly repeat information all the time. You can just cut and paste some of the basic information. And the other one is making sure that you're always tracking your grants. So if you lodge a grant, make sure it's recorded in a central location where everybody can see it. We always suggest making sure they're tabled at minutes of meetings, or if you have regular staff meetings, make sure they're tabled once a month. Just recording what you've lodged, where it's up to, if it's been successful or not. A targeted approach to grants. Now, this is something that we always look at doing so that when a grant opportunity becomes available, you're not scrambling around looking to find out what kind of a project that you can apply for. Jodie's going to cover off particular different types of projects that you can look at developing within your own organisation a little bit later. However, we always encourage any of the surf clubs or any of the aquatic centres to make sure that you understand what your organisational requirements are for the coming 12 months, whether that's equipment needs, whether that is program needs. You might be looking to start a Learn to Swim program for young children. You might be looking at doing something within the CALD community, so the culturally and linguistically diverse community. If that's something that your organisation is looking to develop, make sure you've got an idea of what those programs are and have a look at that so that when an opportunity does become available, you're not scrambling around looking for what type of project can we fit into this. Develop a 2 to 5 year strategy. 5 years might be a little bit too much for some organisations, but if you have a strategic plan and your organisation has thought about not what's just coming up in the next 12 months, but the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that makes it a lot easier as well when you're looking for grant funding. A lot of these funding bodies also ask you, have you prioritised this within your organisation? And if you can very easily attach your strategic plan and show that this is part of your corporate development, part of your growth strategy, then that actually provides a really large body of evidence for an organisation to provide funding to you, because they can see that you've done the planning. You're not just trying to pull something together at the last minute. And the big thing to remember is it's not a numbers game. Not all of your grants will be successful, but they will be successful eventually. We can sometimes be lodging 3 or 4 grants for an organisation before they finally get a successful grant, and then all of a sudden they just start rolling in. So the important thing with grants is to never give up, because you can have the best application, but at the end of the day, the person reading it doesn't quite gel with them for whatever reason, personal reasons, professional reasons. It might be a great application and a great project, but they just decide it's not going to be for them this time around. So continually apply, always put it in, and don't be disheartened when you get the no's, because when that yes comes through, it's very exciting. Grant writing. So this part, I'm going to talk about specific information relevant to a grant. So when you're looking at the eligibility, you always look at the organisation. So sometimes, particularly with corporate grants, they'll be looking at the size of your business and the number of members that you have. Make sure that you're actually eligible to apply on there. Have a look at whether the project that you're looking at actually meets the objectives of the funding body. The funding body will always show what their strategic objectives are and what their aims are in terms of project outcomes. Make sure your project fits within that and look really broadly at it as well. And obviously always make sure that the time frame for completion is within when they want their funding spent. When you're looking at your guidelines, you're making sure that your project aligns with the project funding objectives. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about are they funding wages. I'm suggesting that you look a bit broader than you're just looking at wages, or you might be looking at kickboards or paddleboards. What you're really looking at is what is that project as a whole going to contribute at the end of the day. So you might be looking at wages to develop a Learn to Swim program for adults, a CALD program, a disability program. So when you're looking at the alignment between the project and the funding priorities, what you're looking at is the project as a whole, not that individual item that you're actually seeking funding for. Obviously, if you're applying for equipment or wages or anything at all, just make sure that it's stated within the guidelines that they're actually eligible items to apply for. Some funding bodies don't like to apply for wages. They don't like funding wages because they don't feel like they can measure the success against a wage, whereas if they have a piece of equipment, they can see it, touch it, they can put a sticker on it. So always have a look at whether or not what you're applying for is actually eligible as well. Look at the assessment criteria. So a lot of funding bodies, particularly government ones, will show you that there's a weighting attached to each question. So if one particular question's got a 30% weighting, which is considered quite high, you know that's where a lot of the really hard-hitting information needs to go in. You need to write a bit more, and you need to make sure that you're getting your point across. If a question's only got a weighting of 5%, then obviously that's a bit of a shorter question. You want to make sure that you're putting all your focus and all your attention into those questions that have a higher assessment weighting or higher assessment criteria. And then obviously read the guidelines very carefully. And then this is something I always do before I write any grant. Even if I look at the guidelines and I'm quite positive that my funding program is eligible, I'll then find a reason to contact the funding body. So what you're looking for is as many touch points as you can with this organisation to show them and remind them of who you are. And that's particularly important with local government organisations. So before you ring them, have all your questions ready. The important thing is always say, look, I've read the guidelines. I just wanted to clarify one item that I didn't understand, because as a funding body, what they don't like is for you to turn around and say, I just have a question. The first question is, well, have you read the guidelines? So always make sure you state up front, I've read the guidelines. I just had one further question I'd like you to clarify for me, please. Now, this gives you an opportunity. You've got them listening, and now they can actually start thinking about what it is that you're applying for, and you've got an opportunity to do a pre-sell on your program. Some of the questions that you might have ready is funding objectives. You just want to check the suitability of whether your program is actually okay and it's what council's looking for or the funding body is looking for. Sometimes you'll get a bit of an abrupt response and they'll go, oh, well, it's in the guidelines. But if you can tease out some other questions as well, like you want to make sure it's a realistic funding request. They may say that you can apply for $10,000, but not everyone gets $10,000. And when you have a look at previous successful grant recipients, you might notice that they're only getting 5 or 6. So that's a really good question to ask. You can say, look, I understand that we can apply for 10, but I've noticed historically there's only $5,000 or $6,000 grants given. I just want to make sure my request is realistic. So that's another really good question you can ask. That's not in the guidelines. And also seek feedback on project suitability. So you might have 1 or 2 projects that you're very keen to put forward and they're both suitable, and you can sort of run those over with the funding body just to see if they're willing to say, look, this one's probably more geared towards what we're looking for. And if they've got any grant writing sessions, always attend the grant writing sessions. And again, that's something that Jodie's going to cover off a little bit later, because Jodie has attended quite a number of them, and they're very, very useful when it comes to writing funding submissions. This part, I'm going to look at the project outline. Now, I touched on this before with regards to taking a broader view of your project. So when the question says, can you provide a brief description of your project, or just provide a description of your project, the project outline isn't, I'm looking for wages to pay for a swim instructor to teach small children. What your project outline is really, it's all about, well, this is the example I've given here, is the Open Water Learning Experience Aquatic Safety Education Program. So that's the topic. So that's what we're telling them what it is. We're not saying the project title is applying for wages for the swim school. The project is the Open Water Learning Experience Aquatic Safety Program. Very quickly allows the reader to identify the name of the project and what it's about. And then when you then go down further into the actual project outline and they say, what is your project about? The easiest way to answer this project or answer this question is to break that down into 3 smaller questions. So what is the problem? What are you going to do to fix it? And what do you hope to achieve? Now, depending on how large or what the weighting is against that, you can make that as long or as short as you like. You can break that down into 3 separate distinct sentences, or you can break that down into 3 smaller paragraphs if you're required to put more information. Okay, so what is the problem? This is where you're going to catch them. What is the problem? Well, the problem is children between 0 and 5 have the highest drowning rate in Victoria. I don't know if that's a real statistic, but that's what you're kind of looking for depending on your particular project that you're trying to apply for. Seniors over 65 currently have the highest drowning rate. So if that's what your problem is, then that's what you need to state up front. You need to make it impactful, and you need to make sure that you've caught the reader and tell them this is a serious problem. And then what are you going to do to fix it? Well, that's when you talk about, we're going to implement an aquatic safety program for seniors to teach them how to enter and exit the water safely, to avoid unnecessary falls into the water. And then what do you hope to achieve? You hope to achieve a reduced drownings or reduced water incidents for people over 65 in and around the water. So that's a very basic example, but that's the kind of thing that you're looking at when they're asking you, what is your project outline? Here's an example here, which will obviously you'll be able to have access to later. This is around the Open Water Learning Experience program. So brief project description. So this is a very short one. The Open Water Learning Experience, or OWL, a new program for the Gippsland region to be delivered to youth, aims to reduce the number of aquatic-related injuries and drowning deaths in Victoria through aquatic education. That's a really quick one in one sentence. Or you can do that larger one where we're saying upfront exactly what the problem is. In 2016, there was a 16% increase in the drowning rate of those residing in metropolitan areas of Victoria. And then it goes on to say what they're going to do, and then it's going to go on to say how we're going to fix it or what the outcome's going to be as well. So that's an example of what, when you've got the question, what is your project description? That's what you're trying to get across. You may know your project intimately, but the reader does not know your project at all. They may not even know what your problem is that you're trying to address. So you need to get across problem, what you're going to do to fix it, and what the outcome's going to be in as simple English as you can. Project aim. So when you're looking at funding applications, quite often they ask the same question, what appears to be the same question a dozen different ways. So if they're asking you about what your project aim is, what they're really asking you is, what does your project hope to achieve? What's the end goal? The end goal of this project. If we're looking at the seniors example I gave before, your end goal is to reduce aquatic drownings and injuries for over 65-year-old people in Victoria or in a particular region where you are. Again, that's a simple aim, but that's the kind of thing that you're looking for. It should align with the funding strategy of the program, the grant funding program that you're looking for, and also your organisation. So again, it comes back to when you're looking at what projects you're trying to put forward to the funding body, they've got to align with your organisation's strategies, but also the funding bodies. And don't be afraid to restate what their aims are within your own project aim. Funding bodies like to see that you've actually read the guidelines, you've read the aims, you understand exactly what it is. So if there's a few catchwords in there or a phrase or something that you can repeat into your own aim, don't be afraid to repeat that, because that's always a really positive way of showing the funding body that you understand it and that my project really does fit within the guidelines here and it's what you're after. Just the difference between objectives, outcomes and outputs. If you're unlucky enough, you'll get a funding application that asks you to state your objectives, your outcomes and your outputs. And it can be very, very difficult to distinguish between the three of those. Most organisations will only ask you to state your outcomes or your outputs. So in terms of objectives, this is what you hope to achieve at the end of the program. Similar to the aims, like what is it that you actually want? They need to be clear, measurable and achievable. So when they're clear, measurable and achievable, that means you need to put something in there. So within 12 months, we want to have 60 seniors successfully complete our Grey Medallion program. That could be one objective. The second objective is, this is a much larger one, but the second objective could be, in our region, we want to reduce aquatic water incidents for over 65s by 5%. They're measurable, and that's what you're looking for with objectives. They're always measurable, so that if you are successful in receiving funding, they want you to acquit against those measures that you've put forward. So they're clear, they're measurable, and they're always achievable. Don't put something in there if you know it's not achievable, but it sounds good. Always make sure that your objectives are actually achievable. If you don't quite hit it, that's okay, but make sure there's something that's actually realistic. Outcomes as well. So outcomes are looking at describing the project activities and the learnings or benefit. What did the organisation gain? What did the community gain? So that's all about benefits and project activities. And then outputs are actually the easy part. Outputs are things that you can touch and feel. They're tangible items produced by the project. This could be equipment is an output. It could be paddle boards, your buoys, goggles, things like that. It could be the framework for a new program as well. And there's something I'll go into a little bit further down as well. So here we go, outcomes. So this again is relevant back to the open water learning experience. So in this question here, we've separated the outcomes into three distinct areas. And the reason we did that was because when we looked at the guidelines and the program, they were looking for different things within the project that they were going to fund. So we knew that they were looking at education, we knew they were looking at skills and training, and we also knew that they were looking at something broader for the community. So to make this really clear for them, in this particular application, we broke our outcomes down, as you can see. So aquatic education, skills, confidence and training, and then safer communities. And you can read, I won't go through those word by word, but you can read those and have a look at them and see how we've made those outcomes quite specific for the organisation. And then the outputs, as I said before, kickboards, pool buoys, paddles, snorkel fins, or a completed framework for called Learn to Swim program. So if that's a booklet, it's something you can touch, it's tangible. You might also be doing a research report. A research report is also another tangible output as well that you can put in there. Evidence. So whenever you're doing any funding application, you always need to provide sufficient evidence to show that there's actually a need within the community. And there's a list there of all the different types of things that you can provide. You've got drowning statistics, National Coastal Safety Drowning Report, and the Drowning Report. Obviously, they're two very relevant ones for swim schools and the aquatic industry. Expert reports, newspaper articles. Even after you've had your organisational meeting and you've decided what your strategic objectives are, go through and have a look and start collating some newspaper articles about drownings or accidents or people calling for action because they don't have sufficient swim instruction or their children don't have the skills to be able to safely wade in the water. Anything at all like that, keep those because that all provides evidence for you later on when you're putting a funding report together. Your demographics. Now, council's a great place to go for demographics. But again, if you're applying to council for a council grant, you want to go a little bit further than just relying on council demographics. What you're looking at there, though, is population, economic growth, unemployment rates. CALD, again, I keep coming back to CALD because Victoria does have a lot of CALD-related projects, a lot of disability-related projects in terms of training and education as well. You're looking at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Profile ID, CFA Index, myschool.edu.au, which should be appearing as well for the link there. That's around the education system and looking at where the need is in those particular areas of disadvantage. Look in your own area for local developments. If you've got a huge housing estate coming in, you know that huge housing estate is likely to attract a much younger family demographic. So you've got lots of young kids coming in. So they're going to need to have aquatic education and skills, whether that's inland, whether that's coastal. Wherever we live in Australia, we have a body of water. It's a dam, it's a lake, it's a river, it's the ocean. So with new families coming in, that's another really good way of providing evidence. We've got another 300 houses coming in. So we need to be teaching these children aquatic education and skills. Industry reports again, and letters of support. So industry reports, if you're ever wondering what the most appropriate ones are, again, you can come back to LSV, to Jody Jen, and they can provide you with some industry reports that could be relevant to your particular area. Letters of support, they're really important. You want to make sure that if they're asking you for letters of support, that you're getting a letter of support from somebody that's not your own organisation, but that is relevant to the program. So if you're applying to a different funding body, council is a great place to go to for a letter of support for your area. If you're applying to council, they can't give you a letter of support. But again, you're going back to the peak industry. You could go back to LSV for a letter of support. You could be looking at your local school for a letter of support. There's a whole range of different organisations that you can go to for a letter of support, depending on what type of project you're looking at putting together. Project partners. So some funding bodies prefer to get a little bit more bang for their buck, so they want to see project partners. So if you are looking at going into a school and teaching some aquatic safety education to some young kids, some Learn to Swim, bronze medallion, anything at all like that, have a chat to the school about coming on board as a project partner. Your organisation will still be the lead and you're the organisation that receives the funding, but they're going to be partnering with you by providing recruitment strategy through their school, school supervision. They might be doing some follow-up lessons in the classroom, anything at all like that. So you're looking, if they ask for project partners, that's what you're looking for. So that would be a direct project partner. An indirect project partner would be somebody who's not working on the actual project, but their members might be working or participating in the project. So again, you're looking at schools, local council, core groups, disability service, seniors, sports clubs. A disability service, if you're putting together a project for mobile impaired adults or children, you'd be looking to make them more as a project partner because you need them to help you identify what the disability is, what the requirements might be, what the ratio might be for that particular person in the water. So you'd be looking at them as project partners. The same as seniors group. If you're running a seniors program, and you're trying to hook into the local seniors groups, you're probably asking them to be a project partner because you want them to run the recruitment strategy for you. You want them to hand out the flyers or put that in their newsletter to get people to come and attend. So there's lots of different ways of looking at direct and indirect project partners. Sustainability. So a lot of organisations want to know that if they're giving you $10,000, they don't want it to just last for 12 months. They want to know what the outcome is going to be long term. And sometimes when you're running a program for just 12 months, that's it. You use the $10,000 and that's it. The program has actually finished. But they want to know what's the value of the grant, what's the longevity of the program outcomes. And that's what you're looking at in terms of sustainability. You're not looking at it's just the money's been spent and that's it. You're looking at to teach a child to learn to swim is teaching them a skill that they'll have for the rest of their lives. So you're looking at community resilience there. And that's what it's all about. Community education, anything to do with education, teaching skills, first aid programs, again, teaching a child or an adult to save themselves or save somebody else within the community. That's community resilience. That's a lifelong impact that you're creating. So when you're looking at sustainability and the project really does only have 12 months or you're really looking at equipment to run a Learn to Swim program, you look at the long-term outcome of teaching that child to swim. Look at the long-term outcome of educating those children about the dangers before they get in the water. And that's what the long-term outcome is going to be. If you're running a training program, there's obviously mentoring opportunities there as well. So if you're training older children, so maybe late teens or young adults, you want to see if they're going to be mentoring other people to help get them into the program. So even though the program's finished, you might be asking them to recommend other people to come and join the program next year. So that's another sustainable outcome. And obviously you've got the educational life skills as well that we talked about just before. The actual application, so referees and letters of support, I did touch on that before, so I won't go into that for too much, but there is just a little bit more information there. If you're looking at a local council grant, you probably want to see if your state or federal minister would provide support towards the program. So don't be afraid to approach them. Approach other community organisations, the local sports club, the local school, any external project experts, industry experts or sector experts such as Disability, CALD, seniors, and obviously you can also come back to Lifesaving Victoria as well as the peak body. They can also provide a letter of support, and as the peak body, a letter of support from LSV would be weighted quite heavily, so that's a positive thing. Budget. The budget always does cause a few issues. When you're looking at a budget and completing it, they'll always ask you how much you're applying for, what is the income coming into the project, and what's the expenditure. So quite often the project may cost you $20,000, but you've already got $10,000, so you're really only asking them for another $10,000. So your total project is valued at $20,000. You've got to make sure your income and your expenditure matches $20,000. They can't be different, they must be the same, because every funding body wants to know that they're completely funding their project, whether it's funding the whole $20,000 or that their contribution is going to enable you to provide full funding. So when you're looking at the income side of it, you're looking at all your expenditure. You're looking at all of your costs: administration, audit, evaluation, fuel, registration. You're looking at training equipment, wages, everything to do with the cost of your project. You need to make sure you include in there. But if you're including it as a cost, you need to make sure that it's also covered on the income side of the budget as well. You might also have some in-kind support in there as well. So in-kind support is something that you're contributing to the program, but you're not putting your hand in your own pocket. Now, in-kind could come in the form of volunteers. It's not wages. In-kind support is not the support of a paid employee because they're already being paid to do the job. But you might have some volunteers. You might have some parents helping with supervision. You might have the local school helping with supervision. You're also looking at in-kind equipment. So if you're running a program that requires $5,000 worth of equipment and you're asking the funding body for, say, $2,000 worth of equipment because you've already got $3,000 worth of it, well, then there's an in-kind support there of $3,000. So don't be afraid to look at the project as a whole. If you're contributing some equipment that you've already got, that's an in-kind contribution to the project. And I generally value in-kind contributions of equipment at about a third of the cost of the actual value. Also look at leverage opportunities. So you might be looking at, again, I'll go back, $20,000 project, you're asking the funding body for 10, you've got 5, but you've already got 5 from another organisation. So this additional $10,000 is going to help fund the whole project. Funding bodies aren't afraid to fund a program that's already got some contribution from another organisation. That's called leveraging. That's bringing the community together. And again, it's that getting more bang for our buck. It's helping community projects come together. So they're not afraid to fund a program that's already got another funder. They're not necessarily looking for exclusive rights on a program. Make sure your budget's realistic. So you may have $60,000 worth of in-kind support, which is not unusual if you're looking at a surf club, for example, and you look at a project over a 12-month period and all the volunteer support of the patrols. It's unrealistic to put all of that in. So if you've got a project where you have a lot of volunteer contribution, try and pull it back and make it realistic to the project. You don't want to have the in-kind support through volunteers exceeding the total value of the project, because it's just unrealistic to do that. And again, make sure you check your totals. Everything you put in the expenditure side must have a corresponding income equivalent on the other side to make sure that your income is $20,000, your expenditure is $20,000. That's really, really important to make sure you've got that covered. Example of a budget that I've done before. So you can see, I'll go to the right-hand side first, which is the expenditure. There's a handbook is going to cost $4,000, a coordinator's guide $500, certificates $1,000, awards are $11,000. I won't go through all of it, but you can see all of those expenses on that side. And then on the left-hand side, which is the income, we're asking the funding body for $15,000. The club's going to be providing a $6,000 in-kind contribution and $4,000 cash contribution towards the project to make the total project expenses $25,000. So you can see income equals and expenditure equals, and we've very clearly shown that in-kind and cash contribution into the project from the organisation. It's always good if you can to show a cash and or an in-kind contribution, because it shows the funding body that you're willing to put in something from your own organisation. Lodgement, so we're towards the end of the presentation now, we're at the lodgement, and always proofread your application before you put it in. No matter how many times you read it, if you've written it, you're not really reading what's actually there a lot of the time. Just ask an independent person, someone else from your organisation, partner, anybody. Just get somebody else to run their eye over it and make sure that they understand what you're trying to achieve. Because if somebody else outside of your organisation doesn't understand what you're trying to achieve, be that a friend or a relative, a funding body is not going to understand what you're trying to achieve either, because it needs to be as simple as you can make it. Only include the attachments requested. If they don't ask for something, don't attach it because they don't want it. Just a tip there, if you're doing a postal application, so if your application is due on the 30th of June, is that a Friday? I can't remember, but if that's a Friday, bring your due date forward to the Tuesday in case it gets lost in the post, because that does happen. There's not a lot of postal applications anymore. Most of the applications nowadays are electronic, but there are still a couple of organisations around asking for postal applications. Always note the application somewhere within the organisation so people know what you're applying for. If you can just have one person in your organisation responsible for grants, it makes it so much easier, so that you don't have two different people applying to the same funding body for a different project. It makes the organisation look disorganised, but you also want to make sure that you're applying for the right projects as well. And you don't want somebody going off applying for something that's not particularly relevant to the organisation at the time. Keep the application in a readily accessible location. Again, if we go back to the start of the presentation, where I talked about having your incorporation certificate, your constitutional documents, financial accounts, all those types of things, have the applications all filed in the same area so they're easily accessible for anybody who may get a call about the application. And if you've got referees, always thank them and send them a copy of the application in the event that they're telephoned or contacted. They've got the application there and they very clearly understand exactly what your project is about, because your referees, you want them to be giving you a really good report. And if they have the application, it makes it so much easier because they can talk to your strategies, they can talk to your evidence. Acknowledgement and recognition. Some funding bodies, in fact, most of them will say, how are you going to recognise our funding contribution? And these are just some examples of how you can very quickly and very cheaply do it. Obviously, a website logo on your website, media releases, so regional media releases in your area. And again, Lifesaving Victoria can help you prepare media releases as well if you're a bit stuck, so you can come back to Lifesaving Victoria. Social media, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. If you're successful in your grant and that's what you're going to do, make sure that before you start your program, everybody understands what the acknowledgement is that you've said you're going to do. Because if you've said you're going to do it, you actually have to do it. And the easiest way to do that is while you're running your program, you take a photograph and you lodge it and you post it to Facebook that night or Instagram or Twitter, and then you just screen save that and save it, and you can send that later on as well. That's a really quick way of doing it. Your annual report for larger grants, maybe you're looking at visual acknowledgement on the building in your newsletter, and conservative acknowledgement. This is something that I always come back to with regards to grant funding. A lot of organisations are almost willing to sell their soul for $2,000, and whilst $2,000 is valuable funding and really needed, you need to make sure that your acknowledgement is conservative. If you have a $2,000 grant and you're putting a big sign up on the building and it costs you $500, then that's not value for money at all, and it's certainly not what a funding body wants. You then have a $20,000 grant come along and you've got nothing really left to give them because you've given the big space at the front of the building to the $2,000 grant. So always look at conservative acknowledgement. If it's a smaller grant, website, media release, social media, that's actually okay. That's all you really need to do. If it's a larger grant, well, you might need to give them some naming rights. You might need to put their logo somewhere. You might need to put the big sign on the building. So conservative acknowledgement is really important because you don't want to be giving away your organisation for nothing. And organisations can very easily do that sometimes. Acquittal, always make sure when you've got the grant and it's successful, make sure you understand exactly what the acquittal procedures are and when they're due, because you need to make sure that you're reporting back to the organisation, but it's any organisation, but particularly government, by the due date and in the format that they've requested. If you don't, you're not eligible to apply again to the next round, or they might even delist you for 2 years and say don't come back for another couple of years. So follow the procedures as provided. They'll tell you what they are. Table them at your minutes. Make sure everyone knows when it is. If you've got a forward agenda plan for the next 6 months, make sure that the agenda in 6 months' time says acquittal of this document. It's actually okay to have a delay with your project. And with COVID-19 at the moment, there are a lot of delays with a lot of these projects. It's actually okay not to deliver within the timeframes. Just make sure you tell the funding body that you're unable to deliver as expected and provide the reason. And they're totally okay with that. If maybe your project's changed a little bit and you had applied to buy kickboards, and you don't really need the kickboards because in between applying and getting the funding, someone's given you something, given you some kickboards. So now what you need are pool boys, or you need something else. So write to them, ask them if it's okay to vary the grant. If you keep up to date with them, keep communicating with them, the funding bodies are very understanding. They want to fund you. They want to see this project go ahead. Obviously, always expend the funds as stated in the grant application. If you say you're going to spend it on wages, spend it on wages and be able to prove it. If you say you're going to spend it on bus transport, make sure you've got your invoice and receipt for bus transport. All of those kind of things. Spend it on exactly what you said you're going to. And as you're spending the funding and delivering the project, keep collating your acquittal documents, because when you go back and try and do it later on, it's so much longer and arduous, and people generally put it off because it's in the too hard basket, and then you're looking at delays. And I touched on this just on the previous slide. Just always acknowledge the grant as you committed in the application. That's it from me. Are there any questions that I can cover off for everybody today?
Thanks, Susan. That was amazing. That was amazing. Now, sorry guys, and get rid of my. See if that works. I certainly learned a lot out of that, and definitely tips for the grants good. Go to the chat. We don't have any questions for you specifically yet. If you do have any, start popping away. We'll have another question answer at the end after Jodie. Thanks, Susan. That was amazing. Lots of tips in there. Next, we'll hear from Jodie. Jodie, if you're able to unmute, bring on your video, share your screen. Perfect. Thanks, Jodie.
Morning. Is that still up for you, Jen?
Perfect. Yep. Cool. Great. Thanks.
Okay. Morning, everyone. Thanks for staying on today. So I work in the education team at LSV and have done since 2011. And probably from about 2013, I've worked on our grant applications with Susan and the grant seeking team. So today I'll speak a bit about some of the projects that we've applied for and delivered, and I'll try and relate that back to aquatic facilities and swim schools. Some of the projects that we deliver are very much linked to different facilities. So yeah, whether you've already got an idea or maybe you haven't considered grants before, hopefully you'll get some ideas through the presentation or have already from Susan's presentation. So yeah, the LSV education team, we do apply for quite a few grants, and there's a few reasons that we do put in these applications. So definitely for the program, the established programs that we already have, we do apply for additional funding, and it's not about developing the programs or covering the sort of admin and overhead costs. It's generally for those variable costs for the programs. So we want to cover our instructor wages, the travel, sometimes the venue hire, and for equipment. And for these applications, we're looking at increasing participation in those programs that we already have. And in doing that, sometimes we're targeting the high risk populations, so those low socioeconomic areas, high cold, special schools, and then higher Indigenous populations. Giving those, and generally our programs are targeted at schools, so yeah, giving those students the opportunity to participate in our programs where they might not otherwise be able to. Through the funding, we can offer those free or heavily subsidised. And we do find too that some of those schools, after participating in the program once, they'll actually come back a second year and become fee-paying participants as well. So I guess for your swim programs, your swim schools, and other programs you have, it can be about community engagement. So making opportunities free and targeting areas that might not generally be participating in those programs, or potentially getting groups back after taking a break for a while with the COVID-19 restrictions. Other projects we do apply for funding for, so we definitely apply for some of our pilot programs. So these are new program ideas. We've generally already got a business plan, you know, something that we've been thinking about. So you might have been working on something over this time, working from home and whatnot, something that's been in the back of the head for a little while. This is an opportunity to sort of pick that up. You might have put some plans in place. Yes, there's definitely a few pilots that we've applied for and been successful with. And then lastly, we do apply for some research grants as well, and that might coincide with some pilots to deliver some new programs, or it could just be about finding out what your community needs. So the Bush Nippers one is an example of the year one was a research program evaluating the Coastal Nippers program, and then year two it became that pilot program. So we have done a little bit of the last sort of 5 years, or the 14, 15 to 18, 19, 5 years, we applied for over 100 grants, and we were successful with 66 of those. We apply for grants from $2,000 up to $70,000. We definitely apply for some larger grants too, but they generally involve a few more people in the organisation. And depending on the project we're applying for, some of the grants, yeah, probably an average around $5,000 to $8,000 we apply for some of our programs. There definitely are grants available for less than $2,000, and for us it's about looking as, is it feasible for us to apply for some of those grants, and it's generally not. And same as Susan was talking about contributions earlier, looking at what the requirements are of the funding organisation. So some funding organisations will ask you to contribute as much as they're putting in, and whether that's income from LSV. So we need to look at, again, is it worth it? And depending on the application and what we can get out of that, we'll look to apply. As you can see, we received an income of almost $600,000 for those grants during that time, and more importantly, we were able to reach 26,000 participants that otherwise wouldn't have been able to participate in some of those programs. So I'll just run through a couple of the actual projects that we deliver regularly. So for us, our Sink or Swim, it's a classroom program, and the Open Water Learning Experience program. So that's delivered at beaches, rivers, pools and lakes. They're kind of our bread and butter programs. They're evaluated annually. We know that we've got the messages consistent with LSV's risk and research team and the drowning statistics. So we're not really concerned with getting as much funding for evaluation and that side of things. So our applications for these and delivery of these are predominantly for the instructor wages. We can also, or we have purchased trailers, we've purchased schedule boards and been able to provide some training to deliver programs to students with disabilities. And, you know, we've been able to purchase some other equipment as well. So I'm sure lots of swim schools and centres have some equipment sort of at the back of your storerooms that could do with a bit of a turnover. So we definitely use grant and funding opportunities to turn over some of our equipment as well. And then the cost to travel regionally as well, just being able to make it free for schools or students that would otherwise struggle to participate or just may not, you know, depending on their background, their parents might not be interested in paying for those kind of programs. We're also able to, one of the projects was to pilot our Prep to 2 program. So our Open Water Learning Experience program is predominantly targeted at years 3 and above. And one of the opportunities we had was to design a Prep to 2 program for open water. What we actually found after delivering the program and evaluating the program was it probably wasn't necessary. We just needed to make some slight modifications to our current open water program, but it was still a success in that the participants obviously gained a lot from the program itself. We were able to use the equipment and the learnings and put that into our current program as well. We also apply for, and Susan mentioned the Grey Medallion program, so that's the Royal Lifesaving Society Australia program. We piloted that with a few facilities when it was first developed, and you know, LSV have actively sought funding for a range of projects to deliver this one in partnership with facilities. And some other applications, we have applied for the Before School Swimming Trials, delivered that. The Bushnippers program, which was obviously a larger grant, but again, like the Grey Medallion programs, these projects have really heavily involved close partnerships with various aquatic facilities. So not just the use of venues, but using your staff expertise and obviously delivering the program as well. And then also research into the feasibility of ongoing options. And finally, the last kind of grants that we really have been applying for a lot more recently as well are our digital programs. So we've been applying for these for a number of years. So the virtual reality programs, we've actually received a few grants to develop the different virtual expeditions. I think the most recent one might have just gone up or will go up soon. Our Everyday Lifesaver app, so the initial grant and the initial app was developed through a grant a few years ago, and we actually received another grant to update that recently as well. So you can kind of, you know, use multiple grants for your projects as well, or to update after evaluation. And also our virtual excursions. So originally these were developed to work with other emergency services. So really linked in with schools around their safety topics in the curriculum, thinking about who can help you in the community. So we've been able to form some good partnerships there. But it's also set us up for the current situation. So, you know, we'll be able to deliver, or hopefully we'll be able to deliver our Sink or Swim program virtually. We've kind of already got the equipment and we've already got some of the expertise to be able to deliver those programs virtually, which is another thing you might be looking at in terms of dry programming. Some of your projects might be around the equipment to get some decent cameras, or at the backdrop even, just to make it really clear and helpful for the participants watching from classrooms, or hopefully joining in from the classrooms as well. So I'll run through just one of our successful grants. We applied for the Open Water Learning Experience program in the pool. This one was with Moonee Valley City Council Community Grant. So like I said, we've worked with Susan and the grant seeking unit, so they often send us these kind of opportunities, and as a team we'll look at it as to whether we do put in the application. For this one, we'd identified that we had the capacity to fit some more programs in, some more open water learning experience programs. There's an opportunity in this council area where we didn't necessarily have schools booking into the program. There are also some high risk populations, so we did have that low socioeconomic, the high cold groups. And we also had some really good partnerships already in place with the 3 local facilities in Ascot Vale, Windy Hill and East Keele leisure centres. So that was a big tick. We made sure that our budget was going to work with what the funding body were offering, or what we could apply for. And then we made sure we had the support for the program. So not just from those facilities, but also from the local schools. And as Susan said, so we definitely spoke to the council. And yeah, like Susan said, I definitely recommend going to those council grant writing sessions and just speaking to the council community strengthening team or grants team. They're a really great resource in assisting with your grant application. So whether it's talking to them directly, wouldn't suggest it probably the day or 2 days before the application's due. You're probably not going to get much help, busy with other things. But yeah, definitely get in touch with them early on in your application and attend those grant writing sessions. They are kind of geared towards the council applications, but they also give some tips on other applications you might be putting in. And the other thing they're really great for is linking with potential partners. So when you go to those grant writing sessions, there will be people from other community groups there that might have be sharing their ideas for what they're wanting to provide for their community groups. So you definitely have the opportunity to chat with people then and link in. And if you don't attend the session itself, chatting to those the grants teams, they often will know that. They'll know those people and they might be able to link you in with some groups. So if you're looking to develop a cold program or you're looking to develop a disability program, then they might already have contacts that they can pass on to you to work with. So yes, obviously we were successful with this grant application for the Moonee Valley City Council. Susan spoke earlier about objectives. So we did meet we almost met the objectives. We had applied and said we would reach 500 students. So we got close. We got 450 students participating in the program. We had 3 schools involved, and the programs were delivered at all 3 of the partnering aquatic facilities, which was great. We were also able to offer, and again, that was one of the objectives of the application, was to deliver a swim instructor training. So that was the From Open Water to the Pool workshop delivered with a group of instructors that they could then incorporate into their swim lessons throughout the year. We also found that at least one of the schools booked into this program later booked into swimming lessons that they hadn't previously been doing before with a facility that they attended. So that was a fantastic result. I don't think any of these schools have actually been able to participate in the hour program since this, but being able to do swimming lessons after that, or just being encouraged, just that little step to get them into swimming lessons, is an awesome achievement. And we were also able to purchase some equipment. So like I said, it's always good to be able to turn over some of that equipment and not have to find that in your budget. That can be used for future programs as well. So some tips and learnings. So the first one, I think Susan did cover off a little bit as well, but definitely getting that feedback and not being put off if you're not getting the grant successful. This was actually our 3rd attempt at the Moonee Valley Community Grant applications. So the first application was actually for our Sink or Swim program, and the feedback was that we needed to get those partnerships on board. And the second application, we had those partnerships on board. And I think the feedback was that we were very close. There were just so many other applications. And they actually were very good in giving us a couple of suggestions just to tweak the application. So it's not like we're writing a whole other application 3 times. Like, they were very similar. It was just updating a few points. And yeah, the third application, we were successful. Definitely, again, making sure you have everything in the one spot that somebody can access. So the Moonee Valley grant, I actually didn't deliver myself. I think I put in the first 2 applications and helped with the third. I then went on maternity leave, so somebody else had to then pick that up a few months later when we found out we were successful for the grant. So just delivered that towards the end of that year. I think Jen actually might have gone on maternity leave as well. She was assisting with that one, and somebody else had to come in and complete the acquittal. So definitely making sure that you have everything there to be able to do that. Photos are obviously great. Seeing the smiling faces of the kids is always fantastic. I think it's fantastic for us as well, just to see that. But your grant bodies will love to see those in the reports. It's also great to get for your social media posts, as Susan said, get it done on the day. Making sure you've got that media consent beforehand will make that a lot easier. And making sure you're getting the photos yourselves as well, rather than relying on the participants sometimes to send that through. It can be a bit slow. Making sure you've got that communication, again, between the funding body is important. Again, building those relationships, your partners, your participants, and other areas, I guess, of the organisation. So it might be your media team, if you've got a media team, to make sure that they are aware of when these things should be scheduled to go out for your social media posts and things. And also keeping it simple. So when you're looking at things like your letters of support for schools, understanding that, they may not be thinking about their swimming programs or what they might be coming up in 6 months' time. So having those good relationships with them, easiest way to get a letter of support is to write it yourself and get them to just pop their name down and add the letterhead we found. But also understanding that if they don't have the time to get that back, not to just, mark them off, maybe the next year they'll be able to be a part of the program. Also to have a plan B. So for the Moonee Valley grant, one of the things was the schools that we originally got letters of support for couldn't participate in the program once we were successful. So it was about going back to the funding body to check we could go to somebody else or some other schools, and then working on that to get some other schools on board. And obviously budget is important, so making sure that you're not overspending. I would suggest, if you can, and it will depend on the funding body or the actual grant application itself, but trying to budget in some additional admin hours. So if you can get someone in casual, obviously booking in those additional participants can take time when we're already very busy. So if you can do that, definitely a good idea. And then the last point is probably to get some feedback on the day wherever possible, especially if you've got some evaluations that you need to do to link back to those objectives and the outcomes. So wherever possible, make sure you're getting that on the day, because it can be really hard to get those surveys and things back from groups after the fact. I think that is all from me. As Jen said, if you've got any questions, you can also send that through to the education@lsv.com.au. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Jodie. That was amazing. I'm going to throw to Michelle and see if there's any questions out there in the chat. Either Susan or Jodie.
Thanks, Jen. So far, no questions coming through, but thank you, Susan and Jodie. That was a brilliant presentation. I wonder in the chat as well if there's anybody that's currently applying for a grant or has previously applied for a grant that wanted to share their experience in the chat with us. That would be great. But I know from experience, I've applied for a few grants and it can be a bit overwhelming. And I think Susan covered it, that there's a few questions that come up on the application that seem quite similar. So that was great that you were able to explain the differences there. So thank you for that. But otherwise, no questions coming through. So back to you, Jen.
Thanks. No worries. And there's a lot of grants out there at the moment, guys, for different reasons. And although there might have been a little bit of a lull in them in some respects, they're definitely ramping back up. So it's a good idea to really look really hard, look at what your objectives are, what your program is, what you want it for, and then start looking. And as the girls have said today, like there's no harm in applying. And if that's 200 times, that's 200 times. 201 could be your time. So that's it for today. We'll see you all next week. We're actually going to play the Rock Pool Ramble, Watch and Learn, at the end for those who missed it again. And we'll see you all next week, 11 o'clock on Wednesday. Thanks for coming, guys.
Hi, my name is Caitlin and you're watching another episode of Water Safety Watch and Learn. Today we'll be learning all about how to stay safe at a beach and what different activities we can do there. We'll also be conducting a science experiment. But first, let's head down to coastal Victoria to see what we can find at my local beach. I'm heading to the beach today with my friend Jess, because remember, we never go to the beach alone and we never swim alone. We've checked the weather conditions and we've also looked at the map to work out the safest way to get there. So let's go. We've arrived at Sorrento Back Beach. Before we head down to the beach, it's important that we read the beach safety signs. So let's go and find the beach safety signs for this beach. Here is the beach safety sign for Sorrento Back Beach. We'll find these beach safety signs at all the different entry points to the beach. These signs tell us the important information we need to know about the waterway, as well as the different dangers and what we can expect at this beach. So let's have a closer look now at what this sign tells us about Sorrento Back Beach. These are some warnings. Strong currents, deep water, slippery rocks, high surf, submerged rocks, and unstable cliffs. These are regulations. These are not allowed. Dogs, horses, motorbikes or push bikes, camping, and fires. In the event of an emergency, call 000 and tell them the code that appears on the sign. This is the code for Sorrento Back Beach, but this code will be different at other waterways. Life-saving services. Sorrento Back Beach is patrolled only when the red and yellow flags are displayed by lifesavers.
What does this mean? When a beach is patrolled, we will see the red and yellow flags set up to show us the safest place to swim. We'll also see lifesavers or lifeguards actively patrolling that area between the flags. Let's see if this beach is patrolled today. No, this beach isn't patrolled today. We can't see any red and yellow flags on the beach or lifesavers or lifeguards patrolling that area between the flags. So we won't go swimming today because remember, we always have to swim at a patrolled beach and always swim between the red and yellow flags. So what else could we do if we can't go swimming at this beach today? Sometimes we might see rock pools appear at a beach. Rock pools are home to many different creatures. What sorts of creatures might we find in a rock pool?
A rock pool is a pool of seawater that is left between rocks on a beach after a wave flows back into the sea. If you do not disturb the surface of the water, you may be able to see lots of different things like shells, limpets, mussels, oysters, barnacles, sea stars, seaweed, anemones, sea urchins, crabs, shrimps, snails, worms, seaweed sponges, and much more. Rock pools are beautiful to look at, but best not touched. Rock pools are also home to one of the most dangerous sea creatures, known as the blue-ringed octopus. In fact, it's one of the most venomous animals on the planet. The blue-ringed octopus is very hard to spot. It camouflages in the rocks and can be as small as a 50-cent coin. When angry, blue rings appear and there can be deadly consequences if you are bitten.
What other popular activities might we see people doing around the rocks? We might see people rock fishing. Rock fishing can be very dangerous, and that's why it's important that we always wear the correct safety equipment. But what am I forgetting? That's better. It's always
important that we remember that we must wear a life jacket if we're doing any type of recreational activity on or around water. Wow, we've learned so much already. Let's take a closer look now at life jackets and discover the science behind how they work. So grab your worksheet and a pencil and let's get experimenting. Now that we know about the importance of wearing life jackets, do you know how they work? Let's find out. In front of me, you can see we've got 2 jars filled with tap water. We've also got 2 oranges, but they look a little different to each other. Can you spot the difference between these 2 oranges? That's right. One has its skin on and the other is peeled. We're going to see what happens when we put these oranges into the jars of water. Can you predict what will happen when we put the oranges into the water? Will they sink or will they float? Let's test out if your prediction was correct. Wow, what can you see happening here? We can see that the orange with its skin on is floating, but the orange with its skin off has sunk right to the bottom. What does this tell us about the way life jackets work? Why did the orange without its peel, which is lighter than the unpeeled orange, sink? This is because of buoyancy and the importance of a peel to keep an orange afloat. When an orange is placed in water, there are 2 forces at work. These are gravity, which pulls the orange down towards the earth, and buoyancy, which is the force that pushes the orange up. The weight of the unpeeled orange is equal to the gravitational force. At the same time, the buoyant force is the same as the weight of the water that the orange has displaced. Because of this, the unpeeled orange floats. The orange peel does add to the weight of the orange, so we might have expected it to sink. But this peel actually helps displace enough water that is equal to or greater than the weight of the orange, allowing the unpeeled orange to remain buoyant and float. Just like a life jacket, the peel is filled with pockets of air that allow the orange to be less dense and therefore float. When the peel is removed, the orange cannot displace enough water and the gravitational force becomes stronger than the force of buoyancy. The peeled orange becomes more dense and sinks to the bottom. How does this demonstrate the way life jackets work? Can you explain what happened in this experiment and come up with a conclusion with the results that we found? So everyone, it's time for you to have a go at your own activity. Make sure you remember all the water safety messages we learned in today's episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to hang up from the webinar by pressing the red button. See you next week.